Welcome back. It's Jill. I hope you're well. We are in July, early July in Scotland, and it's been a beautiful summer so far. I think in the south they've been having a heat wave, and I guess we've been having a heat wave too, but the best thing about Scottish heat waves is we normally get to about sort of 24, 25, and then it stops, and that feels like a lovely temperature. So I hope you're well and enjoying your summer. This week we have Dom Higgins from the Wildlife Trust, and we wanted to get him on because he's played a really big role in shaping the developments of green social prescribing and the idea of this natural health service. So we wanted to talk to him a bit about nature connection in communities and what's happening at policy level. So quite a lot of the points that he's talking about in terms of the government is kind of England focused, but there's a lot in here that I think you'll find really interesting. He also was one of the early architects of Green Gym, which is run by a charity called TCV. I think it's called the Conservation Volunteers. Dom no longer works for TCV, but he was part of setting that up, and so there's some really interesting stuff that comes out of that. They set that up in the 90s. And that was really working around getting people outside to do a bit of a warm-up and then do some kind of gardening activity and then have a cup of tea at the end. It's a really good chat. It's quite rambly at the beginning, but stick at it. I'm just assuming that you listen to this podcast while you're sort of bumbling around doing nice things. So hopefully you don't mind slight rambles at the beginning, but it's a really enjoyable podcast and I think you'll get a lot out of it, particularly looking around green social prescribing and how to connect with communities and how to really listen to what people need rather than what you think they need.
How to stand on shifting sand. How to bend but stay intact.
Okay. I am here today with Dom Higgins. It would be hard for me to really summarize what Dom has done because he's worn so many hats and worked in so many organizations and been part of so many great programs. So I'll just let him introduce himself. So Dom, who are you and how did you get here?
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to have space for this conversation. So yeah, who am I? So I'm Dom Higgins, currently head of health and education at the Wildlife Trusts, which we can get into later. Wildlife Trusts is 46 independent charities, and with a sort of 47th cog in the middle. Some people call it the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts, but we generally refer to ourselves as the Wildlife Trusts. And yeah, I've been here for 9.5 years or so. How did I get here is a very interesting question. Quite by accident, I think largely. I can trace it back to, so I'm a drama graduate, so very strange to find myself here, and lost patience really after I graduated with the whole do a bar job and do some auditions and don't get called. So like yourself, I trained up and went did some teaching abroad. And then I got involved in an organisation after 5 or 6 years of that, that trained others to do that. And that was a very small organisation focused on gap year experiences and career steppers, called Eye to Eye International Projects. When I joined, there was sort of 4 or 5 of us. And I started to work on some of the partnership programs in Asian countries. So in Thailand, in India, and in Sri Lanka, where we'd set up community kind of development or placements and conservation placements and teaching placements, because we were training up people to be teaching. Then the next question for them was, oh, where can I do this? And it naturally built from there. So it's a bit of a process. And if I then skip forward maybe 4 years, when we had 3 offices, one in Colorado, one in Leeds, one in Ireland, about to open one in the States, and I was asked to look at a turtle conservation project in Thailand, a place called Golden Buddha Beach. And I went there, and they were full of people, and said, no, we're not taking any more volunteers. We have a partnership with this organisation called the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. So I was like, okay, tell me about that. And they basically described a partnership where BTCV built up their capacity and their skills and offered them the support they needed. They listened to what this small conservation organisation focused on turtle conservation in Thailand actually wanted. And it wasn't hundreds of people going on their gap years. It wasn't people dropping in. And, I absolutely get it. Parents would want somewhere safe for their young child to be on the first 3 months of when they travel. And, there's a real value, I think, in that. But the value to the organisation and to conservation at large was pretty limited. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment. It was a sort of career. Okay, so this is a charity in the UK that builds up the capacity and then slowly withdraws from the partnership, and then the Thai, or sometimes the Estonian, or wherever the international partner was, became the more kind of dominant partner, if you like, in that relationship, and they would drive what was needed, and we started to learn from each other. And I thought, what a brilliant way of working. A true partnership based on equal needs and different skills and gaps, and how we can help each other. And so I kind of came back. I kept an eye on BTCV, and when I saw a job, I went for it, and I left the whole gap year behind. And just as I was leaving, we were bought out by TUI,
Yeah.
the big travel
Yeah.
agency.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I felt really happy that I had
It's good
moved on.
timing. Yeah. It's interesting what you said, because I sort of spent some time in that sector as well, living in Southeast Asia, and you do see the sort of gap year. There's a portmanteau, voluntourism sometimes is what people call it. And you use the word dropping in, which I think is really interesting, because I think we see that tendency at all different levels and all kinds of organizations, this idea of dropping in to save an area, to save it. Even in the UK, areas of economic deprivation, we hear just about this idea: we'll come in, we know what's best, we'll tell everybody how to do it, and then we'll fix everything. Whereas, you're talking about this model, obviously the capacity building, giving people the tools. But then the word that really jumped out at me is this idea of listening to people, what people need. And I was going to ask, my next question was going to be, is there a through line between behind your career? And what I mean is, I think you kind of have some similar history to me, in that at the time you're thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm doing some ESL here, and now I've worked in some other organization here, and then at first it might not seem coherent. But then if you look back, if you were to look over your CV and say, actually, there are some commonalities here. And I think one of the commonalities that I spotted when I was looking at your bio and the things you've worked on, is I think that's one of the things I've seen, is that you do a very good job of listening to people, and you help other organizations listen to groups and populations. But that's me imposing on you.
No,
What
it's
would you say is a through line, that if you're going to look over your CV and try to make sense of it? Okay, what are the common themes that would jump out at you now in retrospect?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty perceptive observation, Andrew, in terms of the listening side of things. And it's in another way, you could say you sort of place yourself in the middle of various processes that you think, or ideas that you think will have an impact and work well, and being totally unqualified for a role, but having a confidence and a natural way to sort of, I mentioned I was kind of a drama graduate, so you can communicate and you could form relationships, and having sort of traveled and stayed and lived in places, you get that kind of approach to life, open faced, open arms, and I think it's come out of that really. Um, when I went into gap year, I really wanted. It was completely unaltruistic. I just wanted to travel and then be paid to travel. Let's face it, it was pretty selfish. But actually, that light bulb moment is the thread, I think. And so there's something out of necessity, because you find yourself in a place that really you're just learning by experience. I don't, like I say, have any further qualifications or studies or those sorts of things. And particularly when you get into the environment sector, and some of those placements that we set up were around conservation, environmentalism. Um, that was perhaps the location by chance, by happenstance. And when you scratch further, actually, it's always been about the people that live in those areas or work in a particular area, or children that learn and play in a particular area. So it's and the natural environment draws them out, and it draws me in, and it's that real common thread. But I think if I look back from the gap year times and into BTCV, which is now called TCV, and a non-landowning, non-membership organisation, which was highly kind of effective, lots of brilliant people, still are, really ingenuity, because you don't have that security blanket of members or a lot of land. You naturally have to face into communities and listen to what they feel about their lives, what they want to change, what they care about, and then insert yourself and your organization or your funding or your relationships into what you can do about that, and how you can work with them. So I think that has driven me. And obviously there's an environmental thing, but I'm not I'm not, I have a deep concern for the plight of nature and the planet, but I feel a lot differently to many in the sector about people's role and the absolutely vital need to change the number of people that care about this stuff.
So you came back and you were working at now TCV, and then eventually you ended up at the Wildlife Trust. So can you just sort of talk to me about some of the projects and endeavors that you were part of along the way, just so people can get a sense of what you've worked on over these last few years?
For sure. When I first joined, delighted that I tracked down BTCV at the time, this organisation I was thoroughly impressed with on their international work, and then um, was put immediately on secondment into the Department for
Hmm.
Education.
Okay.
Why? I don't know. But actually, I do know why. There was a contract, there was a program called Millennium Volunteers, which will date it for you. And Millennium Volunteers was a beautiful time when the Westminster government invested huge amounts in 16 to 25-year-olds. And this was and that was really a lot of the people I had supported and worked with were of that age, really. And so it was a program called Millennium Volunteers, and you would have 10 principles, and it was to encourage volunteering amongst 16 to 25-year-olds. And the strap line under, I can't remember all the 10 principles, but the key one was build on what you're into, which is another really interesting thread, which you could probably trace all the way forward into present community health. But so it was a strategic contract to support the three northern regions, so Yorkshire and Humber, Northwest, Northeast in England. And I'd say there was about 60, 70 projects there that in all kinds of different walks of life would support young people into doing volunteering, civil engagement, whatever it might be. And BTCV, provide a lot of the conservation opportunities. So that's the link. So the idea was to sort of deliver the government program, as it were, and create a self-assessment process that eventually led to a change in contract, because then the government was pushing things out into local connection services, which is kind of careers and working with kids who are not unemployment, education, or training, which remains a real key challenge today. Um, and so it was, as that contract handed over, it was to give the 147 projects across England, because there was obviously all 9 regions, the ability to assess their strengths and their weaknesses as they went over to this new kind of contract and as central government withdrew. So it was a brilliant time, a wonderful time where a lot of resource was, put into 16 to myself. And I listened to the people back then, and quite often they would say, "Oh, the funding's been frozen," or this, or the other. And I kind of had the feeling that you're so lucky to have this, and the young people are so lucky. And really, the people I meet, people that've been through Millennium Volunteers and done the whole program, and they attribute a lot of their kind of direction in life or their career or whatever it might be, their interests, to that program. So
Mm.
good time.
Yeah, it's without getting too wistful about the whole thing. In retrospect, I think it does. Whether or not we knew it, it does feel like back coming up to the year 2000 or the few years around it, really before 2006, 2007. I don't think we realized that in some ways it could have felt like a high watermark in terms of a lot of. I mean, I don't want to put too much of a golden hue on it, but like in terms of optimism and funding and feeling like things were possible. Because it's definitely my own recollection of the era. It does feel like there was a really optimistic mood that I'm not saying is gone now, but I'm saying that perhaps has been tempered by the last 20 years or so. I don't know if that's a fair statement or not.
And what's interesting is, and this is why I think we can hold on to the hope here, is that I spoke to people when I was at TCV, so I was in my early 20s, and there was people there in their 50s who'd been through something called, I think, what was it called, the YEB, or the national? There was some kind of massive volunteering program. Can't remember the name of it, but it was where big grants were put into people to get into the kind of environment conservation, practical kind of sector. And then there was the YTS, which was the youth training scheme, which I think probably was in and around or before Thatcher's time. Again, people would say that. And I think if you reap a whirlwind when you cut support and services and investment in young people, emerging adults. You just do. And it's the pressures are ever more today. So I think it's going to require even more investment. Um, but I think it will come back out of necessity. But it's the impact it had on on the organisation as well. It's really, really great. And for me, I could carry through the experience I had, which wasn't very limited to that point, into BTCV and develop other youth programs and relationships. And that was things. There was a new charity called V Inspired, and we creatively used the landfill match fund, these environmental trusts that would give you $1 million if you got it matched from government. Again, government were matching up to 50 million quid at the time. They would match any kind of youth program. So again, they did carry on investment. It was Gordon Brown's kind of days, and then it was it was effective, I think. Yeah.
I wasn't going to ask this question right away, but just because you spoke about it, so I might jump around and then go back and keep on talking about some of the projects you've worked on. But already you sort of mentioned this idea of legacy and funding and sustainability, and these programs. Obviously, if we wanted to talk, if we want to put it like on a apply an economic lens, you could say the ROI, the return on investment on some of these programs, like working with the Millennium Youth program that you were talking about, is obviously huge. I think it's one of these things that we see time and time again, that we do have these great returns on some of these programs, and yet they always inevitably they seem to end, whether it's be due government change, political change, lack of funding, things like that. And I guess it's one of the things I want to talk about later in the conversation is how can we try to create, or how can we try to secure a better legacy. But one of the things you were talking about is this idea of working with volunteers, and I think that's one of the conversations we'll have about a lot is working with volunteers. And you mentioned that you said, well, we're going to have to go back to something like this inevitably, with the way perhaps funding is, or perhaps the way that, societal needs. You said this is something that we'll have to go back to. Can you explain a little bit what you meant by that? Because I'd like to unpack that a little bit.
Yes, and so um, I mean, volunteers are, by its nature, it's an incredible thing, um, and the reasons for people getting involved as a participant or as a volunteer are varied and many. Um, I think particularly when I was at BTCV at the time, if you look at the times of days when they were run midweek during the day, and if you were employed, it would be hard for you to participate. And therefore, it then comes to the roots of how do people get involved in that then? Um, and undoubtedly, this is becoming more formalized these days, but people being referred in and supported in, and it could be through, a job centre plus, it could be through, a local community group, a Friends of Park who are working in a place, and then they said, oh, you know, you should do this. You need, you could use these skills. You could use this certificate, this accreditation, this training course. Um, so you've got a real mixture and then you've got graduates who need that extra bit of experience, and then you'll have retired people who are reasonably well off, and at the time, informal health referrals, enlightened GPs and other health professionals that say, do you know what you really could do with having listened to you is some fresh air or some company or just something to keep you busy or a reason to get up in the day if you're struggling. And what you've got then, if you put all that together and you remove as many barriers to self-selecting as you can from a volunteering group, which can be an issue, you have an amazing social mix. You can't find it anywhere else. In a place that levels, there's no hierarchy. The people who would be happily making the tea or be sharpening the tools or whatever else. So not only is there, because the task is multifaceted and the way the skills that people bring, and they don't understand, they can't believe the power that they've got or the skills they've got. It all bubbles up, and I think you get that amazing mix, and you get that huge boost to your self-worth, as well as all the kind of uh, more formal stuff that will go on a CV, or the informal stuff that will just make you feel a little bit more confident. Um, so it's incredibly powerful, and if you take the current kind of um, in fact, successive governments, they look at the charity sector and you will say, right, we're going to have a thing called a compact. It's an agreement, which lots of my colleagues would say was a very good thing back when there was a compact. And it was about principles of how you work with charity sector, third sector, civil society, however you want to describe it. But at the basis, it recognizes that what you've got here is a huge amount of value to society. Charities historically have been born out of a need, public health, or an out, or a cause, or a terrible incident, or a tragedy, whatever it might be, and they fill that gap. But actually, if you flip that, what you've got is an essential building block of a modern day health service, essential kind of group of organizations that will preserve, grow nature, bring it back to people's doorsteps, connect it up, adapt to climate change. And so you've got all of these things, but at the heart of that, you're also improving people's well-being. You're dealing with a loneliness epidemic. You're um, helping somebody with mental health diagnoses, or anxiety or depression or those sorts of things simply by the act of bringing people together to a common cause and working together, getting the kind of necessary serotonin and the vitamin K, whatever else, but actually physically raising your heart rate and seeing the impact of your work. And it's just so beautiful. And it doesn't. I think there's two things that the government get. One is the amount of resource and the cost it takes to do that, and the second thing is actually this stuff's going on everywhere, and that's the investment you need to recognize. And you sorry, I'm going on a bit about this one, Andrew, but it's like the other enemy of this is the projectization. Millennium Volunteers was one, and you said, why can't it continue? And that's the thing, is everyone wants their next thing. So after that, it was V inspired. We need to set up this new charity. Lots of people said at the time, don't set up a new charity, they'll become a competitor. Set it up, became a competitor, eventually folded. Then they moved to the next thing, National Citizenship Service, brought in by the Conservatives, still going. There are very few that have that kind of longevity. Duke of Edinburgh, things like that, I think are kind of interspersed in it, and they adapt and they become more open and inclusive. But yeah, I think this projectization is a real issue. But actually, if you invested in the longer term activities of civil society as partners and stakeholders, which they are, then I think you could have a very different looking society.
Well, let's talk about that, because you've touched on a lot of things I wanted to chat about anyway. I did want to talk about some of the articles you've written on a natural healthcare service for the 21st century, and I also wanted to get into social prescribing, which I think, and green social prescribing, which I think we can touch on as well. But then, also what you were talking about is kind of getting away from this idea of, I would say, smaller organizations or perhaps smaller charities or CICs or whatever, and really looking at some of the structural foundational assumptions about how society works. So that's kind of a big question all over. I'm going to try to simplify it though, which is to say that we have a lot of American listeners, and if we talk about natural health service, or if I talk about green social prescribing, these are going to be ideas that they might not be familiar with. So imagine imagine you're talking to an American, which you are, but imagine you're talking to an anonymous American, and you are trying to contextualize what it is that you're thinking about right now, what it is that you're trying to do. And let's say, where would you like to start with that? Would you like to start with green social prescribing, or would you like to pull back and talk about this idea of a natural health service? What do you think would situate the conversation better?
You're doing a great job of keeping me back on track and actually coming back to the question, because once you start to think, it goes everywhere. I think the best way to answer that is to actually come up with the program where it all began for me, which was Green Gyms.
Great. Oh,
when I was
excellent.
at BTCV,
Yes.
now TCV. And so these were they grew out of a partnership in the late 90s with a doctor's surgery and a brilliant doctor called Dr. William Bird, who I would definitely talk to if I were you, who's still doing brilliant things today. And he basically noticed people who came in to see him fairly regularly that had a social need, rather than a medical or clinical one. And by his own interest and understanding of what nature does for human health, and combining that with having a purpose, you actually, if you could come up with an activity that is sustainable, that brings people together to a common purpose and doesn't kind of waste energy on running machines and weightlifting, and put your headphones on, or your Walkman probably back in the day, and you shut yourself off and you pound away. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. I've played rugby. I've been in these kind of gym situations. It ain't for me anymore, I have to say. But actually, the people that hate Lycra, that really would be turned off by any gym situation, but you take that whole concept and you place it into conservation, local projects where you might be managing community food growing allotment. It could be creating a path between two places that just needed a little bit of work, and then suddenly you've got everybody able to walk in that particular area. If you could turn doing that activity into a sort of a prescription that your doctor refers you to, then that's what you've got. And that's really, I think, one of the first, and certainly the first one that I came across in that kind of green prescription, because it started in the grounds of the GP surgery. So it's like, and it took a lot of kind of support for people to come in, but essentially the pillars of people. So you're in company, because we are pack animals. Purpose, whether that is employment or actually whether it's, today we're going to achieve this and I've got a real part in it. And place, and where it happens is right here on your doorstep. And you're not talking about the far-flung, moors or Yellowstone Park or whatever it might be. You're talking about your doorstep, and you combine that and you start growing the number of green gems. And so there was 2 to start with. Then there was one at Sonning Common. That was where the GP surgery was, down in Berkshire. There was one called 1066 Green Gym, which you can imagine was down near Hastings. And actually, having been to a Green Gym celebration, I remember seeing a friendly argument between the two as to which was the first. But from there, hundreds of Green Gyms sprouted up. Community-led is the natural, as you can tell by the way it grew, because the way that you then keep the membership going is you take referrals via, in inverted commas, I'm waving my fingers about now, through either formal routes, or people find you by word of mouth and they say, you come along here, this would be good for you. And suddenly you've got that mix we described earlier, and it's something that is self-sustaining with very little resource. You need then a project officer from BTCV to organize, to link them to a local biodiversity action plan or a local contract with the council, and suddenly you've got this brilliant activity. And that's essentially social prescribing today. It's just kind of prefaced with a question: what matters to you, rather than what's the matter to you, what's the matter with you, sorry. If you ask someone what matters to them, then you start to understand what they're into. This is the lens of community-based kind of conservation, but actually it's a social model. Yeah, and from there, because you'll see today, and they're still running, and you'll see that there is a trademark. It's a property of TCV for like the intellectual property, but essentially that's because it became a sort of a model that was repeated everywhere. So you would do the stretch off before. It was treated like a kind of a piece of physical exercise. And then again, that attracted another cohort of people that said, actually, it is important to me to be kind of fit, and we'll do our stretching, but it was all built into the language of nature. And it's the kind of similar thing that you saw with guerrilla gardening. It's that adopted the kind of urban language. Well, green gyms adopted the sort of gym language, and that helped establish it, I think, as that is a thing that I can get in London or in Sussex or in Doncaster, and it'll be more or less the same thing. The thing that's different are the people and the local place.
Yeah. When I first heard of Green Gym, because it's an organization I've known about for a long time, it just struck me as such an obvious and beautiful and sort of elegant reaction to so many different things that we see in society. Like you said, I mean, I'm sort of similar. I've spent time in gyms, but gyms to me have always felt like a missed opportunity for all the reasons that you just listed. It's like, here's an opportunity to interact with people and to use our bodies, and you're creating all this physical force. What can you do with it? And then obviously the solution that the market has come up with is putting on the lycra, going under this fluorescent lighting, putting your headphones in, like you said, using these sort of arcane machines to do these sort of, I don't know, not arbitrary movements, but these movements that can feel quite disconnected. So I see that, the dream, everything about the green gym just makes so much sense to me. And then I know it's still an ongoing organization. I know it's still active, but for some reason I just feel like I never hear about it anymore. And I don't know. I don't know why that is. And I don't know if it's because perhaps green social prescribing has matured into something bigger and more well known, and perhaps it's become sort of a niche organization. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation again, because back then it was important to, particularly when you are a charity without assets, to brand this thing up, and it becomes one of your key assets. And those that will track BTCV will know that it not only did the name change to TCV, the Conservation Volunteers, but it also flipped to a sort of strapline of healthier, happier communities for all. The health and the sort of output became the kind of driving purpose, and lots of people agreed with that. Lots of people disagreed with that. I was there during the refresh, if you like. But you've got a BTCV was the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. It was started by 3 conservation volunteers going onto Box Hill in Surrey and doing some ground, putting some spades in the ground, and that's how it started. And it is important, I think, and is still important to our friends at TCV that is rooted in conservation, no pun intended. But they green gyms and other things have become a victim of their own success, if you like. This is probably why you don't know. No, a victim is the wrong word, because they're still there and they're going strong. But actually, this says more about the stuff that's gone right and the success. And if you skip forward to recent days, the reason why the Green Prescribing for Mental Health programme got funded by government was because the NHS came on board, the National Health Service came on board. And before that, you would have people pushing their own thing, whether it's Green Gym or whatever it might be. And there's a good reason for that, which we can perhaps talk about in a bit, but because you're scrabbling for funding, you're scrabbling to find the next lottery, the next grant, and those sorts of things. So everyone pushes their own thing. So it's counterproductive from a sustainability point of view, and it's counterproductive from an integrated health service point of view. But the Green Prescribing for Mental Health programme, led by DEFRA, NHS England, Sport England, Arts Council England, sorry, we're not involved in that one, but we're involved in a related one. Public Health England was the 4th partner I was looking for. And Natural England, of course. And they came together and they designed this really careful program that was more focused on the processes in the system, and how do we get this to scale up? What are the things that we need to learn? What are some of the blockers if you needed to scale up referrals, so you could have referrals as appropriate for anybody that would benefit from participating in nature-based activities? And the program was designed and secured a really decent amount of funding. By the end of it, you're talking, close to 8 million. Doesn't seem a huge amount, but 8 million, 7 locations. That's over sort of 4 years, with a kind of middle year that with it was sustained by the NHS locally, which is a really great output. But right at the start, when they put this tender out, there are, I think, 44 NHS integrated care boards in England. I think the number of expressions of interest to participate in the Green Prescribing for Mental Health programme was in the early 50s. Some integrated care boards put 2 or 3 in. One came from every single ICB in the country. that's success, really. And because it takes all of the environment sector's kind of here's my thing out of the equation, and to where we are today, where they are actively investing in upstream health and community-based health and all the kind of thing. That was the game changer, really. And that until is a really good lesson for other parts. I've got health brief, but also got education brief at Wildlife Trust, and I can see something very similar in the world of education at the moment. I can see everyone pushing their different things. There's lots of different projects and programs that are slightly, siloed off. When you come down to it, you're trying to achieve the same thing. In the education, it's about what people learn and where they learn. And in health terms, it is, contact with nature, being active together socially, contributing to a healthier natural environment, adapting to climate change, and helping achieve the aims of those organizations. It's pretty much every single environmental sector organization. So that is why you need that kind of core health service element to come on board. So it's probably why you hear very much less about individually branded or named programs, and why I think the momentum is there now, unstoppable momentum. It will become embedded in the system.
Hmm. It's really good to hear that the optimism about that. I guess going going back to your bio, because I do want to finish up really talking about lay of the land now and where we are with green social prescribing and social prescribing, because I think that's really sort of the capstone where I'd like to end the conversation. But I don't want to lose sight of at least one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is the Next Door Nature project, which um, is happened obviously a few years after your involvement with Green Gym. But when I was looking some background information, I came across a 10-minute video, and you probably remember the video I'm talking about that really sort of talks about the impact of the Next Door Nature program. I was struck. I thought it was a really beautiful and heartfelt video, and you could tell that it was a program that I think probably did have a really good, positive, lasting legacy even beyond its funding. I was wondering if you could talk about the project a little bit, give me a little bit of background on the project and its goals, and then maybe talk about what it did differently and perhaps better than some other projects that have come before it. Just because I do think there were some interesting learnings that came out of it.
There really were. And actually, it's a brilliant way to tie this all together. um, so it was around the time of the Platinum Jubilee, so 70 years, and the idea came out of various conversations um, around what would be a sort of fitting tribute from a conservation environmental doorstep kind of nature point of view to mark the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth at the time. And obviously, often as these things go, you get people saying, why don't you do 70 places and this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it? And it's, so that was kind of kicked around a bit,
Yeah,
and there's very good reasons for doing that, in terms of headlines. But actually,
yeah,
the brilliant team, I've got to give kudos to my colleague Nikki Williams, who's our director of campaigning and communities. We have a strategy at the Wildlife Trust with 3 goals. One is, as you can imagine, to recover nature. Certain, 30% of land and sea actively managed for nature's recovery by the year 2030. Goal 3, where our health work sits, is around nature playing a valued role in society. Health is a nature-based solution, undoubtedly, just like reintroducing beavers or natural flood management. The second goal is about people taking meaningful action for nature, and a step change in the number of people taking action, the diversity in terms of their background, and also the impact of those actions. In order to understand that, you can't count the number of people and count the actions. What you've got to do is step back and realize that as an environment sector, we're probably relevant to about a third of the population, and that goes off, quite a lot of Western kind of countries, really, I would say, Western in inverted commas. People that care, people where it's relevant, people that, has any kind of meaning at all in their lives. And if you're going to succeed in that first goal, you've got to change the dial on that, right? You can't do it with a third of the population. There's amazing stuff been going on, but broadly it's a losing battle. So if you take a community organizing approach to that, it basically, you go to those places, very much like social prescribing, where you say what matters to you. You go to this place. So what matters to you in your area? What do you don't go and start that conversation with, so there's this species of hedgehog here that we really need to kind of tell you about, or there's a planning application over there which we're going to help you object to. And it's just like, what's that going to do with my life? Whereas actually, if you say to someone, what do you think about the area? What do you want to wake up to in the morning? What body can you get to work? Is there work? Where can your kids play? You've got these different gateways into our world, but it's the gateway of that person. It might be their faith, it might be concern about the dog crap, it might be, and so on and so on. I need to find some work, and but you're tuning into that relevance, and you say, well, okay, we're doing these sorts of things. Would you like to come along? And you build it up from there. So essentially, it's that community organizing approach, which you will know well. And Hari Hahn, absolute guru from the United States, who's been informing all of this kind of thinking from my colleagues. It's a culture change program. So what was suddenly okay, let's do something for the Jubilee, became we will find the funding and we will employ a community organizer in every wildlife trust. The external headline is, we're going to do these amazing places. There are going to be any number of sites. We're going to work with any number of community groups. The point is that once you start to listen to people and they realize, actually, this is very much about the stuff I care about, and my family, or my community group, or my mosque, or whatever it might be, it's suddenly a lot more powerful. And that ripple effect has incredible impacts. So if I told you that the targets, because you always got targets with your lottery, the targets was 200 community groups, 1,600 and counting. That's that just, and that's because of that kind of ripple effect, because you stop and listen. The other outcome really was, after 2 years, that we wanted pretty much every wildlife trust to retain that community organising role, expertise, capacity to continue that work. You can imagine, in order to do that, there's lots of, training and quality work, and conversations about where the funding might come from to do that. But hats off to local wildlife trusts. They've really stepped up, and the vast majority of that, I've seen trusts now organising. If you look at Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, I think they were advertising for a head of community organising a couple of months ago. You know what I mean? We are talking about something really significant, and we've said it, but that is where, and this is the future, I think, of community organising. So there are some funding structures that need to happen for green prescribing to be embedded, undoubtedly, and wider social prescribing. But actually, if organisations have the ability and the capacity in order to deal with formal referrals, and that's a serious thing, you need to be able to know what your limitations are, what kind of issues people might face. But actually, a large amount of the challenge for the health service is about unnecessary illness, unnecessary ill health, unnecessary crises, because of the lack of social infrastructure. And therefore, if you take a much larger population approach to this, and a community organising approach, and you get activism and all of those benefits, wonderful nature on people's doorstep, the cohesion, the barbecues that people have together, the fact that you've created a pathway, the fact that the kids are now cycling to school, whatever it might be. Not only is it a brilliant place to live, it is a natural health service, and that's what we're talking about. And you will see now the NHS talking about a neighbourhood health service. Great, whatever works. These are the sorts of things that we need to do, because it will take the pressure off. And it's not all about, Prevention is really important, and my great kind of friend and collaborator, Dr. William Bird from our Green Gym partnership, he recently was talking very eloquently about this and saying if you prevent all the illness, it's, obviously you have the impact on the NHS, but you get a zero sum at the end of it. It's a bit of a miserable argument, really, isn't it? Although a valuable one. But actually, if you create good health and you create the circumstances in the places where we live, where we work and where we play, and you get that kind of Michael Marmot principle, who is my absolute hero and guru, and that's what's driven me, I would say, throughout my work, is Michael Marmot's work on avoidable health inequalities. Creating and developing sustainable places in which to live, work and play, as he would say. Treating climate as a justice issue, as well as kind of equitable access to nature on people's doorsteps, the right to have clean water, to not have, sort of cars drive past and pollute your children. These are the things that actually would make healthier lives, but also joyous places to live. And we are talking about that happiness, health, those sorts of things. So we need to talk about the health creation side of things, as well as preventing all the illness and saving the NHS money, which we have got great evidence for.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always this conversation in public health about not defining health as the absence of disease, really focusing on, sometimes they'll use the word salutogenic, like what is an environment that, not obesogenic, not, sometimes you'll hear the word lonelygenic, but what are these positive factors in terms of social connections and access to green space that are actually health promoting? And I think it's so important that we flip that conversation to thinking about these sort of positive ways to express, what the potential good life is. And I think, the thriving literature and the flourishing literature is very good on this. But I think that's exactly right, because you're right. Just focusing on this prevention of illness, just sort of, yeah, it is quite a dour way of looking at the world. It's like, well, eventually you're going to get very ill and die,
Yeah.
and that's that. Whereas, well, what can we do along the way? You did a good job of creating the segue anyway, but you mentioned that you thought the next door nature would be a good way to kind of wrap things up and talk about a positive note. And already I think you've kind of really taken this and made it a very optimistic conversation. But we only have a few minutes left, so I'd kind of like for you to just sort of tell me what's the lay of the land now regarding green social prescribing, and what do you feel optimistic about regarding the future?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great place to take this, really. So, the green prescribing for mental health program, the official pilot, had incredible outcomes. It's world leading, and but also in terms of the 8,000 or so people it reached, 57% came from the most economically underserved places. 21% came from people coming from ethnic minority communities. Big reductions in anxiety and depression symptoms. In terms of the return to Treasury, £2.42 for every pound. We've got our own research, Natural Health Service, improving lives, saving money. That got the capability of saving £100 million per 1.2 million reached, which I am told by friends in the Royal Society of Public Health and others that we've totally underestimated the cost savings. Very reductive way of looking at it, but actually, if you forget all the other sort of stuff that we've been talking about, you'd be a fool not to embed this formally in the structures. And we've just had this big NHS conversation in England that says, we need to shift to prevention from treatment. We need to shift to community from hospital, and we need to shift from analog to digital, just in terms of, records and processes and those sorts of things. You can do all this. You can invest in the small organizations, the charities, the community interest companies, the people that run initiatives like Green Gyms, all of those sorts of things. If you invested in those activities, then this is a thoroughly achievable integrated service. And what's happening at the moment is there are a number of integrated care boards who are looking at community-based health or social prescribing. So again, widening it out into kind of, the arts. So, creating, artwork, participating in singing for lung health, joining a cooking group, Nordic walking, having a lunch club, job clubs, debt advice, all of these things, the upstream social determinants of health. If you get a patchwork of organizations that are able to deliver all of those stuff, and you do it at scale, you will free up the time of those NHS professionals that are focused on really what they should be focusing on. As you said, it's not merely about the absence of illness, it's actually about the circumstances that we create. So there is some trusts that are looking at social finance at the moment in terms of preparedness, but there's a proposal that the National Academy of Social Prescribing pulled together in a report in December. It's called Envisaging a Social Prescribing Fund in England. And essentially it says, if government takes a cross-departmental approach to investment, i.e. the multiple departments that you can imagine would benefit from a community-based approach to health, Department for Transport, DEFRA for the environment, Sport England, Department for Culture, Media and Sport, who do all the kind of, as well as the things you would expect. They have the loneliness kind of agenda, how you kind of tackle that. They all pile into that kind of shared investment, shared outcomes fund. Then they propose that would be matched by NHS locally in England, the integrated care boards. And there are enough integrated care boards who are name-checked in that report who are prepared to do that. There are examples. I got an email just this morning about Bradford NHS Trust. They are investing in a green social prescribing kind of networker, as it were. It's happening in bits and bats everywhere. But actually, if you just got a joint approach to government investing in this, it means that you could fund the activities. Because at the moment we've got an imbalance. We've got NHS England investing in community connectors or link workers, and their job is to refer after a couple of conversations and support an individual into something that they're going to enjoy and they know is going to be effective. The thing is, we haven't got the funding to deliver that activity. You're reliant on the charities to do their usual, go to the grants making bodies, go to lottery, go to this in order to deliver this. That shouldn't be the case. That should be the way that we add value to a core funded activity. And actually, if you do that, that's sustainable. And I will guarantee that if you do that, local charities will also do what they do best. Philanthropists will come on board. They'll bring local authority contracts. They'll have businesses involved. It's all the stuff that charities are good at. The stuff that philanthropists and businesses, they don't really want to touch government in that kind of area. But actually, they see a charity doing that good work. And they say, well, actually, yeah, we can see, and what you've got is something really, really sustainable and really effective and really systemic. And I think it's the best proposal I've seen on the table. So I'm really hoping that Wes Streeting, I know he listens, Andrew. If he is going to be listening to this, our
loyal audience member,
our Secretary of State for Health and Social Care need to step up and actually listen to those integrated care boards, because they're being asked to make 50% cuts at the moment. So it's not a done deal. But you have to take this to community. It's one of the strategic shifts, but you have to fund it. You have to resource it, and you will reap the benefits. And so many other things will as well, not least the natural environment, biodiversity, and all the things that lots of my colleagues care deeply about.
Well, Dom Higgins, I think that is a great place to finish it. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise.
And there we go. That was Dom Higgins. I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed thinking more about how health is created and not delivered. And there's a lot of crossover in terms with what Cormac Russell was speaking about. If you go back to, I can't remember what number Cormac Russell is, but talks about this smallest unit of health not being the individual but the community, and that kind of definitely comes out in this. And if you engage with people and you start with what they care about, which is often not a hedgehog, and it might be dog poo or it might be going to work, then you'll have a better success rate. I think what stuck with me from this one was the image of all of these quiet kind of everyday wins, like footpaths being cleared or benches being fixed, and kind of sharing a cup of tea, not being nice extras but being the sort of the fabric of public health. I've put loads in the show notes, a lot about Green Gym and the Next Door Nature video that they talk about, and about green social prescribing, so you can have a look at the reports on that. Please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and if you like this episode and you want to put a comment somewhere, that would be lovely. Next week we are back with Todd Hargrove, which is very, very exciting, because we often talk about Todd's work around pain and play and movement, and how movement doesn't always fit into this mould that we've created. He's got some brilliant books, so it was a real pleasure to have him on the podcast. I think you're going to really like that one. Okay, have a lovely week, and we'll be back soon.